We're going to spend some time doing a Q&A with Graham. Very thankful to Graham for being here, and Karis, and for Graham's talks on emotions. A number of you have put in questions on the Slido page. If you still have a question, then this is the code behind me. We won't have time to answer, or for Graham to answer on every question, but hopefully we will have some significant opportunity to think further. So if I could ask Graham to come up. So I'm going to ask a question. Graham, you're going to answer it.
That's how it works.
So,
at least I'll talk for a bit. Whether my words will constitute an answer is going to be another question.
We'll see how we go. First of all then, how does clinical depression / anxiety fit into the question of imperfect emotions?
Yeah, thank you. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are quite a lot of questions about depression. Because unfortunately for many of us, our whole emotional life will be dominated by that sense of low mood or darkness, desperation sometimes. And the first thing we want to do with that is to sympathise and say that this is not how God wants us to live and to feel. I take it that's all part of the effect of sin in the world, as all illness is. With depression, it is tricky because some depression is quite revealing of exactly what we were talking about earlier in terms of our loves and so on. If you get something called reactive depression quite often when there's some life event, say you go for a new job and you don't get it or something, and you suddenly realise in your response to that how much you'd been longing for that, you're starting to ask questions of yourself. What does that mean about me and my success? And all, for some reason, an event can take on a greater impact, and you might feel quite low because of that. That would be a classic reactive depression, reactive to that circumstance. And that is probably quite revealing of how important that thing was to you. And all that we were saying earlier about what we love and so on, what we value, would come into play. But then at the other end of the spectrum, it seems that some people have whatever degree of brain chemistry going on that makes them more prone to feeling low. And actually their starting point is very different to somebody else's. And it takes very little for them to feel low, and they don't seem to be responding to anything. And if you ask kind of why are you feeling that, what do you love or hate, they'd kind of go, I don't know, I just feel terrible. So all of that is to indicate there's a real spectrum here. And it's not that the questions and the kind of model I've been giving is inappropriate, but it needs to be used very carefully and thoughtfully and sympathetically. And even when you're low, and it's not clear why, and it's not like, I'm obviously overvaluing this, that's not clear. Even then, there is still, I think, the call of God to respond with, say, rejoicing in salvation. And we see this in the Psalms. A psalmist that would say, my tears are my food. I'm crying so much, that's like what I'm eating. So incredibly honest and raw portraits of sadness and lowness, and yet a commitment to trust God and praise God. Whatever that would look like for someone in that setting. Because that's not going to look the same as someone who's like we're skipping along in life. It might even involve just praying a prayer of thanks, even though you don't feel like it. So, completely inadequate answer for a very complicated topic, and there are lots of good books around on depression, Christian view of that. My book on emotions has a chapter on it, but only one chapter. But I want to both recognise something of that spectrum, and that we respond slightly differently depending where we are, and even when we're at that end, God's call still comes on us to take responsibility for how we're feeling.
Thank you. Next question. To what extent should we feel responsible for other people's emotions?
To what extent should we feel responsible for other people's emotions? Should we try not at all? Is that right? This is where you see me thinking on my feet. No, it's not. That's not fair, is it? We said earlier, emotions come from our hearts. So that person is responsible for what comes out of their heart. And that's why I slightly glibly say not at all. I hoped you might laugh more, but it's obviously,
come on, guys.
You're obviously tired or something. And there is truth in that. You are not responsible for someone else's emotion because it comes from their heart. But you are responsible for how you've treated that person. And if you've treated them unkindly and they're upset by it, are you responsible for their emotion? Well, yes, because you are the cause of it, and it's a justified emotion. But it's important to put it that way round, because what I'm responsible for is not how they feel. What I'm responsible for is how I act towards them. And I might act lovingly and kindly, and they say, "Oh, you hurt me." Now, I could do that inadvertently, I could be clumsy, we could all do that. We need to reflect that and say, "I'm sorry, how did I hurt you? Oh, I used that word and that made you think of, I'm sorry for that," But it's, if someone just says, "You've hurt me," or "You've upset me," or something, that doesn't automatically mean I've done something wrong. I'm only responsible for how I treat you. I'm not responsible for how you respond. But in many instances, as we interact in communities, I will do things wrong. I will have hurt you. Our feelings are often the early warning signs, aren't they? The first thing we feel in response. I feel a bit uncomfortable because what they said or something. And they'll often be the things we apologize for. "I'm sorry I said that. That made you feel that." Please don't apologize. The apology that goes, "I'm sorry that you felt hurt." Now that saying, it's like, "I'm sorry you had those feelings." I'm not saying I did anything wrong. No, I should say, "I'm sorry for what I've done that resulted in your feeling hurt." And in doing so, I'm acknowledging that feeling hurt was a legitimate response. If I don't think it was, I need to say, well, I could say, I am sorry you feel that way, but I don't think I've done anything. Help me understand. That's the kind of territory we're in.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Graham.
Good.
Next question. Can you have a healthy emotional life without being a Christian?
What a great question. It's time to finish soon, isn't it?
No, you've got
quite a lot.
Let's say 15 minutes to answer the question.
So look, God makes us with, as thinking, acting, feeling beings, so he makes us live an emotional life. The way the Christian story goes is he makes us like that, he makes us perfect. We turn against him, we sin, and that twists us. And that results in our experience of the world as it is today in lots of different ways. What we become is not kind of all evil or all wrong. We become a mixture. Because that kind of, the original design, as it were, is not completely lost. One author uses the phrase that we become glorious ruins. Because we were made glorious. But we're kind of ruined, and you can still see the glory and you can see the ruin. What does that mean for our emotional life? I think it means that some of our emotional life will be good and right. Non-Christians will feel sad over sad things, and rightly so, and feel glad over happy things. And something of the matrix the presentation I've given, they could resonate with that. And that's because they're still made in the image of God, with God's design in play. But there will be this twisting of it that we've talked about. And that that twisting is only escaped through salvation. It's escaped both through the forgiveness we need for the wrong things we have done, and including the wrong emotions we felt. Those ugly thoughts I was talking about earlier, I need to be forgiven for that. That comes through Jesus. And God reforms us by his Spirit. And when I spoke about the work of sanctification, the growing in good and godly emotions, that's part of the work of the Spirit. So a non-Christian could have a healthy emotional life in the sense of reflecting how God made us to some degree, but there would still be that twisting of sin. They would not be able to have the healthiness of a life being kind of recalibrated and grown by the Spirit. That's what they couldn't have. But because we're not talking binary, this was all wrong, that's all right. Because we're not talking that, there could be parallels between them.
Thank you. That's about 5 minutes rather than 15.
Okay, fine.
That's good.
That's all I've got to say.
You mentioned very briefly the question of God's emotional life compared with Jesus's emotional life.
Yes.
And you said, we're not going there.
Can we go there?
Can we go there? Can you say any more about this, to be precise? That's what the question says.
Yeah. Yes, I can, but again, I'll do so briefly, both because there are probably more questions, but also it is quite a complicated area in understanding God's emotional life. Our emotions are very often caused in reaction to events and circumstances and stuff around us. And perhaps classically, we've thought of emotion as a passive response. They do that, I feel this, and almost like I'm not responsible for what I feel, because it's just a response in me. And hence the language of they made me feel this. Now, we've played with that a bit, but there is still truth in that a lot of our emotions come as responses. And theologians throughout history have been very cautious to attribute that dynamic to God, as if we could make God feel things. So classically, God in some statements was said to be without passions. And passions were specifically the kind of emotions you could be made to feel by others that you might not want to feel, like fear, for example. So you can't make God afraid, was what they were trying to, that's the kind of thing. They often actually distinguished between those and what might be thought of as higher emotions, which they'd call affections, like sympathy or love. They didn't say God didn't have affections. So one of the things going on there is trying to guard God just being a big version of us and then thinking the way emotions work for us work for him. That's not right. He's not. He's the creator. We're the creature. We're entirely dependent on him. But that's not to say there aren't any parallels or ways in which to speak of God's love for us. It's not like God's love for us is something utterly different to what we know of as love.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Graham.
Great.
What should I do if I'm struggling to feel the weight of my sin and consequently not feeling the gospel?
Yeah. God, you're full of good questions, aren't you? Not feeling the weight of my sin. Well, look, we're not about working stuff up in us. We're about recalibrating our hearts. We're about seeing and responding to the truth. So what we're effectively saying is, I don't see my sin very clearly. And so what I want to do is to reflect on it, understand it more, see its depths of ugliness and wrongness, such that I end up going, oh, you know what? That really is horrible. And I then feel it. Now, again, I want to be cautious. How much I feel it is not, it's not like I have to aim. It's not like some perfect, you feel it this amount. That's going to vary between us. That will vary from moment to moment. We feel things in response to what we are focusing on at the time. So if I'm consciously focusing on how ugly my sin is, that's something I'll probably feel worse about it. But at other times I won't. That doesn't mean I've suddenly, I don't care, and I'm neglecting it. It means I'm not thinking about it right now. I'm focusing on something else in life. So it's not like we don't walk, if some of the emotions we want to feel are like dials on a sand desk, and I want to feel joy about salvation, I want to feel love for others, I want to feel despair over my sin, I want to feel sympathy for that person, etc. I can't walk around with all of them turned up to maximum all the time. That's not how we work. But there'll be moments where if I think, I'm taking my sin very seriously, I need to focus on it. Read a book on sin. I've written one. But there are others available.
What's it called, Graham?
It's called Know Your Enemy. There are
By Graham Beynon.
Other very good books on sin are available. Listen to a sermon on sin, do a Bible study on sin, talk to a friend about sin, etc. Focus on it. Pray God would show you your sin, and pray that you would feel rightly in response to it. But then don't expect to carry on at 100% on that.
Thank you. When is it right to be righteously angry?
When something's wrong? God made a moral world with rights and wrongs, and we shouldn't be able to see wrongs and just shrug our shoulders. It's actually a sign of what's wrong with us that I can read through the news and go, 75 people killed in Gaza. Next story. I don't think there is an issue of proximity, relational proximity. I feel much more concerned about the health of my wife than I do, frankly, about you. Sorry. But you would feel more concerned about the health of your wife than you would about me. So we can just be honest. And that's not wrong, I take it, because my wife is very close to me. Well, so there's a relational proximity, and it's not like I should become uncaring of you or whoever, but again, it's not like I can turn the volume control up to 100 on everybody around the world. Jesus was filled with compassion when he saw the widow of Nain, who was burying her only son. I take it there were other widows burying sons at other points during his life, and he wasn't sitting there going, I'm feeling so bad for that person. That was the person he saw. They were the ones in front of him. Sorry, I've forgotten what the question said now.
You're doing really well. When is it right to be righteously angry?
Thank you. So, righteously angry over, in a sense, I could and should be righteously angry over anything that's wrong, but I will feel righteously angry more quickly and readily over the things closer to me, things done to me, things done to those I love, things that are affecting my church, and so on, than I will over things that I can only read in the paper. What I've tried to do in reading the headlines is, rather than just turn the page, as it were, is just to at least pause and go, that's terrible. And I'm at least just trying, for my own emotional reaction, to just acknowledge that. I'm not going to try and enter into the depths of what that must be like for everybody, because I'm not relationally close to them.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Graham. Growing up in a culture of expressing emotions, are there any tips with living in a church culture that may be prone to stoicism, less emotional in conversation? They don't say which church this is, by the way.
Okay, fine. Just the church. Yes. Yeah. So growing up, so we're in a culture that's got more emotional expression.
Yeah.
And then the question is,
are there any tips with living in a church culture that may be prone to stoicism, less emotional in conversation?
Okay. So church culture is a weird thing, isn't it? It's very real. It affects us massively, and yet it's very subtle. You just pick up on things all the time. So culture is made up of 1,000 little things. But that means we're all responsible for it. We all add to it. Leaders, in particular, might want to think about the culture of their church. What would they like the emotional culture of their church to be, for example? It'd be an interesting question. What I'd like to see. How might we get there? Because you can't just flick a switch on culture. You only kind of lean into it and nudge it. And you only do it with everyone taking part. So all of the little things kind of change ever so slightly. So what's a tip for a culture that is not so emotionally expressive? Well, probably out of love and respect for others, don't just do whatever you like, because you want to be wise and thoughtful about them and this culture. That's like acting, that's kind of going, it's how I feel that's really important, how I want to express it. But still try and be authentic, and where appropriate, nudge the envelope, if that feels like a good and right thing to do. Talk to your church leaders about the culture of the church and what you might struggle with as well as what you appreciate. But also recognize that there are different types of culture around. I mean, like some people have said to me, Graham, if I feel passionate about my football team, I shout at the top of my voice at the football match. But then I come to church and I don't. So does that mean I don't love Jesus as much as my football team? And there's a good question there. You know, maybe loves need to be reordered. But the reason you can often shout at the top of your lungs at the football team is everybody else's. So in that little microculture, that's normal and it's encouraged. So you can, if you feel even feel like half doing it, you can just go for it. What is the church culture? And what is normal and what's encouraged? And for various reasons, we might think, actually, we don't think we should just shout. So how do we express emotion? How do we do that well? That's a conversation to have. But what I'm trying to say is don't worry that just because that's more expressive and that isn't, therefore it must be wrong. No, it's more complicated than that.
Okay, Graham, final question. If feeling, and this may be related, but we'll go for it anyway. If feeling emotions deeply is a good and right thing, is it wrong to suppress or hide our emotions from others?
No.
Great.
But it could be. We all know, we all feel things that maybe we didn't even want to feel. So maybe I'm feeling really annoyed with that person sitting in front of me right now, but actually I think that's inappropriate. I don't want them to, in a sense, I want to suppress that. I want to suppress it because I don't want to feel it, and I'm trying to fight it. I want to feel love and care for this person, even if I do find them a bit annoying sometimes. So of course I want to hide it from them. I mean, maybe there could be moments where it would be reasonable to go, you know what, I'm struggling a bit here, and there's a moment of self-disclosure or something. But of course I'd want to hide it. And there'd be many moments where I would, my concern and love and other-centeredness, which has got to be the great guiding principle of church life, do to others as you'd have them do to you. How would I want people to respond in this setting? That might mean they don't suddenly gush all over me because of who I am, and that they know that, they're respectful of that, and so they hold back in their emotional expression, even though they'd feel like doing it. So we're shaped by our love and concern for them, but we still want to be authentic to ourselves, and that will mean we're thoughtful about how we express emotion to people.
Graham, thank you very, very much. Round of applause for Graham.